Have you ever noticed how the loudest moments in life can actually say the least? And how the quiet ones, the pauses, the gaps, the silences, can end up speaking volumes? What if I told you that silence isn't the absence of communication, but the birthplace of truth? When the constant noise of expectations, assumptions, and endless distractions finally fades away, all that remains is what's real. You see, when we're always talking, always texting, always filling the air with words, we don't always hear what needs to be heard. But then something happens. The messages stop. The calls go unanswered. The chats sit unread. And suddenly, you're left with silence. That's when the real conversation begins. Not between you and them, but between you and the truth. Because here's what most people won't admit. It's easy to pretend when words are flowing. You can joke, you can dodge, you can act like everything's fine. But silence doesn't play along. It doesn't let you hide. It exposes what the words were covering up all along, and that's exactly why silence scares people. They'd rather hear a lie than sit in the stillness and face what's real. But truth, true connection, doesn't need noise. It rises in the quiet. If there was nothing meaningful, the silence confirms it. But if there was something real, something strong, something deeper than conversation, silence proves it. Think about this. When two people genuinely belong together, their connection doesn't evaporate just because the talking stops. It doesn't vanish just because there's distance or space. No, real connection lingers. It lives in the atmosphere, in your thoughts, in your heart, in your spirit. You don't have to chase what's real. You don't have to beg for it to stay. If it was never built on just words, it won't fall apart in their absence. That's why silence is more than just emptiness. It's a test that reveals what's true. It shows you who was real and who was just passing through, who stayed out of habit and who stayed out of love. If silence makes someone disappear, they were never fully present to begin with. But if silence deepens the connection, if it strengthens your understanding, if it gives space for reflection and growth, then that silence is something you can trust. A man who truly values a woman doesn't need daily texts to remember her worth. A woman who truly respects a man doesn't need constant reassurance to feel secure in his role in her life. When the foundation is solid, silence doesn't weaken it. It reinforces it. It makes space for clarity, for maturity, for discernment. Maybe you've been there. You thought the bond was unshakable, but the moment the communication stopped, it all fell apart. That kind of pain, it hits hard. The silence made you question everything. But let me gently remind you, silence wasn't your enemy. It was your teacher, your answer. Because sometimes people have to disappear so you can finally see them clearly. Sometimes the noise has to stop so you can hear something greater, something divine. And sometimes a connection has to be tested, because if it can't survive a season of silence, it was never going to survive a lifetime of storms. I know what you might be thinking, but if they cared, wouldn't they have reached out? If I mattered, wouldn't they have said something? Maybe. Or maybe their silence isn't absence. It's reflection. Maybe they're sitting with the same silence you are. Maybe they're also listening, also searching, also waiting for the right answer to rise from the quiet. Maybe, just maybe, this silence is working in your favor, and when the time is right, when the lessons have settled in, when the growth has taken root, the silence will end. Not with noise, not with empty words, but with clarity, with intention, with something real. So don't be afraid of silence. Don't rush to fill it with desperate texts or forced conversations. Let it speak. Let it do its work. Because if the connection is true, silence won't be the end of the story. It will be the proof that the story was never just about words to begin with. Sometimes, silence doesn't just reveal the truth, it prepares you to see it more clearly. And that's where distance steps in. You know that feeling when you're too close to something? So close that your nose is practically pressed up against it. In that moment, you're not really seeing it for what it is. You're seeing what you want to see, what you hope is there, what you've convinced yourself is true. But take a step back, create just a little space, and suddenly, the picture sharpens. The truth comes into focus. Distance doesn't distort what's real, it reveals it. People often believe that if someone stops reaching out, if they don't check in every day, if they take a step back, it must mean they don't care. But let me tell you something that might just shift your whole perspective. Love isn't proven by constant presence. It's revealed by what remains after that presence fades. If something is genuine, rooted in truth, then distance won't destroy it. It won't dissolve under pressure. In fact, distance will clarify it. It'll show you what was strong and what was just a shadow pretending to be. Have you ever been so wrapped up in someone's energy that you couldn't even tell if they were actually good for you? Every interaction felt electric, like a wave rushing over you, pulling you in, pulling you under, and then suddenly they pulled away. Or maybe you did, and at first it feels like panic, confusion, that ache of absence. You want to fix it because the habit of them became stronger than the reality of who they actually were. But as time moves on, clarity begins to rise. You see differently. You start noticing what you'd been ignoring all along. The way they made you feel small in certain moments. The way they took more than they gave. The way you had to shrink parts of yourself just to keep the peace. That's what being too close can do. It blinds you. But distance, it clears the fog. And sometimes, distance doesn't just expose what was wrong. It confirms what was right. There are certain people, rare ones, whose presence remains no matter how far they are. Time can pass, miles can stretch between you, but they linger, not just in memory, but in your spirit. That's when you know. It was never about convenience, never about habit, never about filling empty space. It was real. It meant something deeper. If someone's absence brings you peace instead of pain, that's your answer. If space reveals that what you were clinging to was actually holding you back, that's your answer. And if stepping away from someone makes you feel more yourself again, that's an answer too. So stop fighting for what distance is trying to free you from. Stop chasing people that space is trying to separate you from, because what's truly meant for you won't be broken by distance. It'll endure it. It'll prove itself through it. Now here's where most people get stuck. They think, if someone is really meant for me, why would we ever have to go through distance in the first place? But let me ask you, how can you trust the strength of something that's never been tested? How can you believe in a connection that's never had to stand on its own without constant reassurance or daily communication? The strongest relationships, the deepest bonds, they don't fear space. They don't crumble in silence, because what's real doesn't fade. Some of you might be in that season right now, a season where someone you thought would always be by your side suddenly isn't, and it hurts. You're confused. You're wondering why. You feel like something's gone wrong. But what if the distance isn't a punishment? What if it's a gift? What if it's exactly what you needed? Sometimes the distance isn't pushing something away. It's pulling truth closer. But in order to receive that truth, you have to be willing to see things clearly. You have to step outside the situation just long enough to look at it honestly, without the blur of emotions or the noise of habit. Because when you're too deep inside something, it's easy to mistake attachment for alignment, longing for love. But when two people take a step back and still feel that same pull toward each other, when space doesn't breed doubt but actually builds certainty, when time apart doesn't weaken the bond but strengthens it, that's not something you have to force. That's something you can trust. Because real love, true love, doesn't need to prove itself in a rush. It's not built on urgency. It proves itself over time, through seasons, through silence, through space. So stop fearing the distance. Stop trying to close the gap that may have been allowed on purpose to show you the truth. If someone is truly meant to be in your life, distance won't erase them. It will refine them. And when they return, it won't be out of convenience. It'll be with more clarity, more purpose, more intention than ever before. Because sometimes what feels like the end is actually just a pause, a divine pause. You see, when something is truly meant for you, when it's been ordained, not just desired, time and space can't destroy it. If it was built by God, it doesn't fall apart just because the conversation slows down. It doesn't disappear just because the emotion's quiet for a moment. No, what's real remains, even in silence. And sometimes that silence isn't there to end something. It's there to prepare it for a new season. But we live in a world that says, keep moving, keep chasing, keep proving, never stop. And yet, there are moments, holy moments, when God steps in and simply says, wait. He separates people, not to break them, but to build them. Because there are lessons that can only be learned in solitude, strengths that are only developed in silence, truths that only rise to the surface when every distraction is stripped away. So yes, he allows the pause. He allows the distance, not because he's finished, but because he's still working behind the scenes. Preparing something better, something deeper, something more aligned with purpose. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now. Everything seemed to be going well. The connection felt strong. You were sure nothing could shake this. And then, out of nowhere, things changed. The calls slowed down. The texts became fewer. The presence you once depended on disappeared. And in that silence, doubt crept in. Fear whispered, maybe it was never real. Maybe I ruined it. Maybe it's over. But listen closely. God doesn't operate in fear. He doesn't take things away to punish you. He creates distance to strengthen you. Because sometimes it's not that the connection is weak. It's that both people need to grow individually before they're ready to grow together. If you try to force something before it's time, you risk ruining what was always meant to be a blessing. You have to trust the pause. Think about a seed. When you plant it in the soil, you don't see instant results. You don't dig it up every day just to check if it's growing. You trust the process, you water it, you wait. Because growth, real growth, happens in hidden places, in quiet spaces, before anything breaks the surface. And maybe that's exactly where you are now. In the soil, in the stillness, in the unseen part of the journey. But what if this hidden season is where the most important transformation is happening? Like a seed resting beneath the soil, not every transformation can be seen from the surface. But that doesn't mean nothing's happening. In fact, the stillness might be where the most important growth begins. You trust the process. You let the seed rest, unseen, untouched, believing that something is happening beneath the surface. You don't rush it. You don't dig it up to check. You wait. And then, when the time is right, it breaks through. Stronger, more rooted, more prepared for what's ahead. Relationships work the same way. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean there's no progress. Just because things feel quiet, still, uncertain, doesn't mean growth isn't happening behind the scenes. Sometimes, God does his deepest work in the quiet, in the hidden spaces, in the pauses. And here's what we often overlook. If something isn't truly meant for you, the pause will reveal that too. Because if distance causes it to fall apart, if silence leads to disconnection instead of understanding, then maybe it was never built on something solid to begin with. But if after the pause, after the space, After the silence, two people come back together, not out of habit, not out of need, but with clarity, with wisdom, with purpose. Then that's how you know it was real, that it wasn't just about emotion or convenience or temporary attachment. It was something deeper, something intentional. So don't resist the pause. Don't rush to fill the silence. Don't force something that God might be gently asking you to step back from. Because if it's truly meant to be, nothing will stand in the way. It will come together at the right time, in the right way, for the right reasons. And when that moment comes, it won't just be a reunion. It will be a testimony of what happens when you trust the process, trust the growth, and trust the one who never wastes a waiting season. You see, when two people stop communicating, something shifts. In the atmosphere, in the silence, in the space, in the absence of words, clarity rises. But clarity isn't just about what you suddenly see in the other person. It's about what you begin to see in yourself. Because when their voice no longer fills your mind, when their energy isn't constantly influencing your emotions, you're left with the one person you can't escape, you. And that's where the real work begins. Some people fear being alone with their own thoughts. They fear the stillness, because in that space, they have to confront the questions they've been avoiding. Was I giving too much? Did I ignore the red flags? Was I settling for less than I deserved? And sometimes the hardest truth to face is the one that whispers, I was losing myself in that connection. You were so focused on keeping them, on pleasing them, on proving your worth, that somewhere along the way, you forgot about you. Distance forces you to turn inward. It reveals the parts of yourself you've been neglecting. It shows you where you've compromised, where you've bent, where you've shrunk, just to keep something that maybe was never meant to be held that tightly. It brings you face to face with a powerful question. Who am I when they're not around? Not, who am I in this relationship? Not, who am I in their eyes? But, who am I truly? Because if you can't answer that, if you can't stand strong in your own identity, then you'll always be at risk of losing yourself in someone else. So when the calls stop, when the back and forth fades, when the noise quiets and you're left in stillness, ask yourself, do you collapse? Do you chase? Do you fill the silence with distractions just to avoid the ache? Or do you pause, breathe, and begin the process of rediscovering who you are? Because if a connection required you to shrink, to silence your voice, to suppress your needs, to question your value, then hear this clearly. That distance isn't your enemy. It's your deliverance. There was a version of you that existed before they came into your life. A version with dreams, with vision, with a sense of direction and purpose. But somewhere along the way, maybe you started bending, adjusting, dimming your own light just to make the connection work. But listen to me. If love requires you to lose yourself, it's not love. It's attachment. It's fear. It's comfort disguised as connection. And sometimes, God allows space between two people not to punish, but to protect. Not to separate them forever, but to help one, or both, find their way back to themselves. So maybe the real question isn't, will we end up together? Maybe it's, will I find myself again before that happens? Because once you start finding your way back to yourself, something shifts. You stop looking outward for validation, and you start standing firm in your own worth. When you truly know who you are, deep down, you stop settling. You stop accepting connections that leave you begging for attention. You stop clinging to situations that keep you constantly questioning your value. You no longer chase after someone who seems perfectly content living their life without you in it. Because when your identity is rooted, when you finally see yourself clearly, you stand taller. You walk with confidence. You understand, maybe for the first time, that real love, true love, doesn't ask you to shrink to fit. It doesn't demand that you abandon pieces of yourself just to belong. Real love celebrates you for all that you are. So use the silence, use the space, not as a punishment, not as a waiting game, but as an opportunity to heal, to grow, to build a life so full, so grounded, that your happiness no longer hinges on another person showing up. Because the healthiest, most fulfilling relationships are not built on dependency. They're built on two whole people, coming together not to complete each other, but to complement one another. And when you commit to doing the work, when you pour into your spirit, when you remember your worth, when you start becoming everything God created you to be, you begin to realize something powerful. You don't have to chase what's meant for you. You don't have to convince anyone to value you, because the right person, the one who sees you clearly, who respects your essence, who values your presence, won't need convincing. They'll recognize your worth without you having to lose yourself just to prove it. Eventually, there comes a moment in life when you have to ask yourself a brutally honest question. If someone can go days, weeks, even months, without reaching out, without checking in, without making any effort, what does that actually say? Because words are easy. Promises are easy. Saying I care is easy, but it's actions that tell the truth. It's consistency that reveals someone's true intentions, and sometimes the silence, the distance, the lack of effort, that is your answer. Too often, we cling to the potential instead of facing the reality. We replay the highlights, the good memories, the moments when they were present, affectionate, engaged. We hold on to those fragments and let them outweigh the truth of what's happening right now. But hear me, love is not built on what used to be, it's built on what is. If someone is choosing not to check on you, not to show up, not to stay connected, you've got to stop making excuses for them. Stop romanticizing the past. Start seeing the present for what it is. Some people don't reach out, not because they don't care, but because they assume you'll always be there. They assume no matter how long they disappear, no matter how little effort they give, you'll still be waiting, still available, still willing to pick up where things left off. And that's why you need to be careful. Because when you accept inconsistency, when you tolerate emotional neglect, when you allow people to come and go as they please, you're teaching them that your presence is guaranteed no matter how they treat you. But the truth is, your presence is a privilege. Your time, your energy, your love, these are gifts. And if someone cannot see that, if someone refuses to value that, then you need to be strong enough to stop waiting for them to wake up. You need to be brave enough to walk away. Because the hard truth, when someone truly cares, when someone genuinely values you, they won't just tell you, they'll show you. They'll show up. They'll make the effort consistently, not just when it's convenient. So the question is, are you holding out for someone's potential or finally ready to honor your reality? Let's talk more about that in the next part. Once you stop begging for the bare minimum, once you stop settling for crumbs of attention, something becomes crystal clear. You were never supposed to chase what was meant to stay. When someone genuinely values you, truly values you, they don't just reach out when it's convenient. They don't only show up when they need something from you. They move with intention. They check in not out of habit, but because going a day without letting you know you matter doesn't sit right with them. So if someone has gone quiet, if they've pulled away, if they've chosen silence over connection, let them. Stop chasing, stop questioning, stop trying to decode every little behavior like it's a secret message. Because the right person, they won't leave you confused. They won't make you feel like an option or leave you hanging in emotional limbo. They'll move toward you, not away from you. The right person protects the connection. They invest in the relationship. They make their intentions clear, without you having to beg, without you having to chase, without you constantly having to remind them of your worth. And that That's what this season is about. It's about learning to let go of anyone who can't see your value. It's about learning to stop overextending yourself for people who wouldn't do the same for you. It's about realizing that silence doesn't always mean something's broken. Sometimes it means it's time to stop, fixing what wasn't built to last. If they're not reaching out, maybe that's your sign to stop reaching too. If they're not putting in effort, maybe that's your cue to start turning that energy inward, onto your own growth, your own healing, your own joy. Because the right people, the ones who are truly meant to stay, don't have to be convinced. They won't need reminders to care. They will want to be there. They will show up. They will make sure you never have to question your place in their life. And when you begin to operate from that mindset, when you stop begging for the bare minimum, when you stop tying your value to someone else's ability to choose you, that's when everything begins to shift. That's when you start attracting people who truly see you. That's when you notice who was there because they wanted to be, and who was only there because you made it easy. And that's when you step into your power. The kind of power that says, I don't need to fight for a seat at any table where I'm not welcomed, because the right people, they'll always make room for you. There comes a moment when you need to stop looking at what someone is doing and start looking at what they're not doing, because absence speaks. Silence tells a story. And a lack of effort, that is your answer. If someone can live without you, if they can go days, weeks, even months without reaching out, then it's time to stop holding space for someone who already made the decision to step away. Because when someone truly values you, they don't risk losing you. They don't put you in a position where you feel forgotten or replaceable. It's easy to say, maybe they're just busy. It's easy to think, maybe they're waiting for me to reach out first. It's tempting to create excuses. Why they haven't called, why they haven't checked in, why they've stopped trying. But let's be honest, people make time for what matters to them. Always. So maybe the real question isn't why they've gone quiet, but why you're still turning down your volume just to hear their silence. Let's dive deeper into that next. When people care, they show up. When they don't, you'll feel it. And ignoring that truth doesn't protect you. It only delays your healing. People prioritize who they want in their life. It's that simple, and that's sobering. So if someone isn't making time for you, if they're not showing up, not checking in, not investing in the connection, you owe it to yourself to stop sugarcoating what that means. Because the more you chase someone who's clearly okay without you, the more you fight for someone who's showing you, through silence, through distance, through indifference, that they're comfortable living life without your presence, the more you start losing sight of your own worth. Some people don't pull away because they're confused, not because they're scared, not because they're unsure about their feelings. They pull away because they're comfortable. They've gotten used to the dynamic. They know that no matter how far they pull back, no matter how long they disappear, you'll still be there. You'll still reach out. You'll still be waiting. You'll still make the effort. And as long as you keep proving them right, as long as you keep being the one to bridge the gap, they'll never feel the need to change. Why would they? You've already taught them that your presence is unconditional, even when their effort isn't. But here's the turning point. The moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop reaching, the moment you stop being the one who always patches things up, always keeps the connection alive, always makes excuses, that's when everything shifts. Suddenly your silence becomes loud. Suddenly your absence becomes noticeable. Suddenly they realize you're no longer the one carrying the relationship on your back. And that's when the truth finally shows itself. Because a person who truly values you, they won't let the silence drag on. They won't risk losing you just because they got comfortable. But a person who was only halfway in, someone who was just enjoying the ease of having you without doing the work to keep you, they'll let you go. Quietly, without resistance, without a fight. And that is your answer. So instead of fearing the silence, instead of filling the space with assumptions and spiraling thoughts. Let the silence do what it's meant to do. Let it reveal, let it clarify, let it expose whether this connection was ever built on genuine care or just convenient access. Because here's the truth, when someone is for you, they'll make sure you know it. They'll show it, consistently. They won't leave you wondering, doubting, second-guessing your place in their life. They won't walk away without a word. They won't risk letting you go if they know your value. And when you start operating from that truth, when you stop begging for breadcrumbs, when you stop overextending for people who wouldn't stretch a finger for you, that's when you reclaim your power. You'll finally see that you don't have to lose yourself to keep someone else. You don't have to fight for a place in a life that was never ready to hold space for your fullness. You don't have to chase what was truly meant for you, because what's meant for you won't run from you. The right person? They'll never put you in a position where you're left wondering if you matter. They'll never let the silence drag on long enough to make you question your worth. They'll never make you feel like an option when you were always meant to be a priority. So let the silence speak. Let the distance do its work, and trust that what's truly meant for you will never ask you to beg, to chase, or to convince. Because the right people, they will always make sure you know you belong. And when you begin to live from that truth, something incredible happens. You stop settling and you start attracting what's aligned. Let's keep going.